what is so important about being able to create this opportunity.
Okay.
So different aspects of that theme and where you played in and what your experiences was, and you went on an internship. I can't remember what country it was, but
yeah, France.
We were just talking about it.
And just how that felt for you. I mean, we were also talking about bringing up the 2015 goals that ISEC International has set for both exchange rates and member rates and leadership rates, and what your ideas on that are.
I have none.
Okay. That works too.
Yeah, this is of course the unique thing about ISEC, that ISEC has always been really a creation by students for students, and therefore it has always maintained a certain degree of independence, which means that advisors are more for purposes of providing authorization of having office space or using audiovisual hardware. At the time we didn't have computers.
It was a little different then.
Now things have changed a lot.
Well, Dallas once explained to me how Exchange used to work before there was, myisec.net and email, and it was a big room where everyone who had a TN form sat at a table, and everyone who had an EP form would go into this room, and it was just hours of switching, and then that was Exchange for the year.
That's right.
That just sounds like mayhem.
Back to the original way of doing it.
Yeah.
Was it always like that? Like, when was it you had the forms? And
Well, there weren't very much forms. There were just names, and you knew a bit about the people that you carried in your pocket. So that was the first exchange was in 1950, and I figured that if I had jobs from Finland with me in my pocket, I sure was entitled to one in France. So I just decided to take one myself. So that was kind of my own traineeship experience. Now, do you want to turn it on, or?
It's been going for the last 5 minutes or so.
Oh.
So ahead of us. Sneaky.
I actually already got, there's a couple things that people have said that are
already good. So we did put up a couple basic structural questions, but you can talk about anything that you find.
Why don't I talk first?
Okay, yes.
And then you can see
then
what
ask
some
questions.
questions.
Perfect.
So what we had in Scandinavia before ISEC was something called praxis, and this was a cooperative kind of activity between the business schools in the Scandinavian countries, including Finland. And we had exchange arrangements, and then after World War II, it was just a feeling that somehow we needed to get hold of a way of gaining fluency in the big commercial languages. And that's when we had a first sort of preliminary meeting in 1948 in Sweden, and I think it was actually in Stockholm, where the Stockholm Business School kind of provided leadership. And then we went officially back 1949, now as delegates with authorization from our respective student organizations to actually negotiate how we might set up an organization that we then referred to as the ISEC organization. And again, the French acronym was of course a reflection of the fact that the French group was very strong. And at the same time, we saw it as a real advantage if we could just get into France and Belgium and United Kingdom. And so we had delegates from those countries, and in the process the arrangements were made that we would in effect set up an exchange mechanism where we were going to be collecting job opportunities in our respective home countries, and then come together for purposes of an exchange where we essentially were trying to match the jobs we had and students who were interested in traineeships, essentially meant for the summer months. And so that was how we met in getting ready for 1950. and had a wonderful location in Paris. You know, I mean, Isaac has always felt like you need to have fun in addition to being serious. So, you know, I can still remember how we were at dances and dinners and met interesting people, and it kind of just sort of was something special after still World War II being in our memories in a way as having been a pretty awkward time. And so it was that was in a way then the beginning, and then later on it of course grew and expanded itself across a number of nations, and eventually it had actually a publication for Isaac. It had an office, and I think the sequencing was there was an office first in Geneva and then in Brussels, and there were very energetic leadership, and so there was a lot of activity, and with that went the creation of some really strong sponsorship arrangements with a number of international businesses. And it also meant that when the American Isaac was opened up, that the leadership was able to get a very hefty board for the group that then led to the contacts whereby the Isaac traineeships could be created. And so here was apparently kind of a quiet effort trying to get a chapter into play, but it really had not taken off. I came here in 1957 and wasn't really thinking about that I, in effect, could be representing, so to speak, the seed for an Isaac chapter. But it was one of my students, Bob Enslow, who had found information about it and came and asked me about it. I said, oh, well, yes, I know Isaac because, you know, I was early on. And so that was in 1963, and it was around 1965 that he went off to an Isaac local chapter president conference in Yale, at Yale, and came back, you know, totally electrified. You know, we got to get the chapter going in Seattle. So I said, well, yes, of course. You know. And so that was a beginning, and so I was faculty advisor for a spell, and then I had a couple of colleagues who had a short period, and then I went back on it again. So I'm sort of the forever advisor until this last year. So it's been very interesting. Now I have a big box of historical material in the sense that it's a life of Isaac from the period of say 1950 onwards, and with some detective work you could recreate, so to speak, who have been president for the Isaac chapters and who have been alumni that you know have been here. And there was one of the most interesting years was we had a member, Mike Passage, and he got all activated by the thought of becoming an organization person, you know, while he was a student. And so he actually gained the presidency of Isaac and went to New York. And then came the war effort, and that meant that he was liable for being drafted. And so he decided to resign from the presidency and return back to become a student. But he's local here actually, and I've seen him a few times in connection with the Rainier Club. So so we had that, and then I went back the first time to Finland while at the same time attending an Isaac conference in Lausanne in Switzerland. And I had my oldest son with me, who was in 1966. He was probably about 8 or 9 or something like that. So I locked him up in the hotel while I went to the conference. And then we went to Finland. And that was my first visit since I had left Finland. So that was, you know, some 16 years later. And that was an interesting thing for my son, because being the oldest son, he had heard Scandinavian spoken at home, because I'm a Swedish-speaking Finn and my wife is a Norwegian. So it was a little difficult, but he had kind of gotten it into his mind, but of course never spoke it. Then when he discovered that his grandparents, if he could just tell them what he wanted, they'd give him anything. And he suddenly spoke Swedish fluently. And for the next 4 weeks, why, we did nothing but speak Swedish. And then after we came back to US, why, it had disappeared again as a willingness to do it. But he has the automatic translation machine in his head, so that's kind of fun. So that was in effect then also in combination with an ISEC function. And again, the interesting thing was that just in those years of the mid-60s, ISEC really was playing a very major role in terms of traineeships and having companies become aware of the fact that this was a merit to see on a resume that somebody had in effect been abroad and been by himself or herself independently, and therefore had a degree of maturity and energy level that was perhaps a distinguishing mark. So I think we had just a really very good hearing with the business community, which tended to be the sponsorship. Now, our chapter here in Seattle, it had its ups and downs, as obviously any student chapter has, because students come, there's a crescendo, then they all graduate, and then it's a question, how do you restart, and another crescendo, and then it disappears. And we found that we had a number of students who were in other areas, say in English, say in the Jackson School of International Business, say in architecture, and they had an interest in potentially having an opportunity to have an internship. And so we found that we needed really to expand our base for membership, because the business school until a year ago took in students for their 2 last years, juniors and seniors. And it just turned out that that was a bit too narrow a base on which to have a really reliable membership. And so by expanding it beyond business school students, we had perhaps a more interesting group, and at the same time more students in the pool from which to see leadership coming along. And there was also a period in the 60s when Microsoft was a very important user of trainees from other parts of the world, and very clearly, in some sense, was planning to have them return to their respective home countries and represent Microsoft. So some really had some real career opportunities as a result of Microsoft's location here and role.
You met Arthur DeHaan?
Yes, there is one who has been just year in and year out. And of course his wife, Lily Heine, was somebody who was interested in Chinese studies and had a major in it and had a language base, and eventually persuaded ISEC to make her represent ISEC for purposes of setting up ISEC in China, because she was interested in having an opportunity to go to China, and of course discovered that it was zero without an ISEC organization. And so she was instrumental in a 2-year stay in China to actually get ISEC chapters going. So we can claim credit for that, for our chapter. Mm-hmm. The other thing we did was we sponsored another chapter at the University of Puget Sound. But it had the same problem that we had experienced, that it isn't easy to get a reliable pool when you have a limited pool from which you pick, and so eventually they disbanded.